Welcome everyone to our first installment of the Fall Chapter Leader Learning Series. Tonight we're talking about anti-racist education, but before we get started, I wanted to introduce to you, in case you weren't at the summit and didn't get a chance to meet him, our brand new professional learning manager at CSTA, Carlos Vasquez. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody, that'd be great. Take it away.
Awesome. Absolutely. Hey, everyone. As Jason mentioned, my name is Carlos, recently brought on to the team in the role of professional learning manager. This is actually week 4, so this will be my first month at the end of the week, which some of these weeks can feel pretty long lately. I wonder why. But I'm really excited to welcome you all tonight. Just really awesome. LaTrice kind of alluded to it with just noticing all of the different cities that are represented. That's really such a powerful thing, especially given the topic, for tonight and what we're experiencing in this country, to crisis. And on this end, looking at anti-racist education, was really fortunate to meet LaTrice through a mutual friend, mutual colleague, and excited to have her present. So happy to chat more later on about me and kind of like some of the goals we have, but I want to turn over to LaTrice so that we can have optimal time. So again, thanks for joining us tonight, and I'm looking forward to meeting you all virtually, in person at some point. So let's, LaTrice, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Carlos. And first, I would like to just start by saying thank you to you and to CSTA for considering me to lead this conversation tonight. A little bit about me: I am a teacher as well, so I am teaching 4th grade here in Atlanta Public Schools, and I'll share a bit more about my context as we go through the presentation. But another full-time job I have is I'm a consultant. So I work with schools, school adjacent organizations, districts to help them develop their programming, in addition to developing their ability to simply talk about race in schools and then become comfortable with that so that they can do other things like talk about data in the ways that racism is built into the structures. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. And we've welcomed, and this is just a bit about me. So I am most proud of being a classroom teacher. I think that it's the most wonderful job. It's also one of the hardest jobs right now. So I totally understand, like, if you taught all day or if you are exhausted from that, I am here experiencing that with you. And I really appreciate your commitment to not just engaging in this conversation, but continuing your growth in your development outside of your traditional school or district provided PD and engaging with CSTA. So here is our agenda. Now, it seems pretty packed, and it is, but what I want us to do is take a lens of I'm learning so that I can take a piece of this, something of this presentation back with me. So one of the things that I always do, no matter how I'm engaging in a conversation, especially when it's with a group, not in an individual conversation, but with a group, I like to create an agenda. And the reason that I do this, and it doesn't have to include words, like I've done pictures, even when I'm with my students, like first we're going to, like, I might use emojis or something like that. But what I want to highlight here is this helps with some of the me work or calling a thing, some of the things that come down farther on the agenda. An agenda is a North Star or a guiding point that really helps push through when you're having a difficult conversation or a courageous conversation, especially around race, because what you don't want to do is allow the conversation to spiral. And as we engage, and these agreements and norms will come up again, I ask that you do 4 things today. The first is center the children you serve. So what I like to do is get an image of a specific student that I serve in my head when I'm working, because the ultimate goal is, despite whatever I have to push through, grow through, I'm doing it in pursuit of a better tomorrow, a better world for that child and all the children in this world to live in. So my first ask is that we center the children we serve, we stay engaged, we listen actively, and we work to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And we'll talk a bit more about that. But I'm going to go ahead and name that we will talk about race. Something you hear may strike you in a specific way. It may bring up an emotion for you. That emotion is valid, and I want to challenge you to not disengage because of it. So here is one of the anchoring quotes for my work. For me, as a visual learner, I underlined and I highlighted I underlined and bolded the part of the quote that really puts the image of what anti-racism looks like into my head. I won't read all of it, but I will read that part. But unless they are walking actively in the opposite direction at a speed faster than the conveyor belt, unless they are actively anti-racist, they find themselves carried along with the others. Now, I know a common conversation right now is, well, what's the difference between being not racist and anti-racist? And that's what's illustrated here. So if you are working and you are employing anti-racist practices in your work, that means you're just not on that conveyor belt, soaking up the smog, breathing in all of the racist ideas that exist. Instead, you've turned around and you are actively walking, I would dare say running, sprinting in the opposite direction. And that ebb and flows because it's a very arduous process, but you are actively walking, moving opposite of the direction that racism would just have us go. And if you are not racist, you're still, and when you're still, you're breathing it in, you are engaging in the practices, you're not interrogating your existence, you're just simply being. So hopefully that image can create just a guide for you of what this could look like. So I'm going to put a link into the chat box to a Jamboard. And I will honestly say you guys are computer science teachers. I consider myself to be a bit techie in a way. But I know you've probably seen a Jamboard before, but just humor me. So what I'd like for you to do is to determine the percentage of your life, 0 to 100%, that is impacted by race. And go ahead and add a sticky note. And, changing it now. Can edit. Now everyone has editing access. Sorry about that. Now, if you could put it on a sticky note and put it wherever you want it to go. And as you guys add in your percentages, I'm going to organize them. And I ask that you do this in a minute or less because I don't want you to get too in the weeds. Just think about the percentage. And you can add a sticky note by going to the left side. It's the fourth icon, the fourth tool down. So we have 16. yes, trying to stack them a wee bit for the ones that are duplicates. Absolutely, Shayna. Feel free to share your discussion on Twitter. And if you want to tag Equity, I'm going to put our Twitter handle there for you. No, there shouldn't be a code for Jamboard. But if you like, Carrie, if you want to pop your percentage into the chat, I'd be happy to add you. Add your number to our board if you like, if you feel comfortable. Just let us know. So as everyone gets a chance to add their percentage, I want to leave you with this. We have a range. We have from 5% to 100%. And you, sounds good. I'm going to go ahead and add you now, Carrie. I want everyone to be included. And in my work and in researching this question, and this is something that I pose that you can take back and begin breaking the ice with your other CSTA chapter members, or even at your individual school sites or your context in which you work. This is one of those trick questions. And the trick to this question is people usually take the perspective of the conscious effect that racism has on their life. Now, racism is baked into this country. It's in the founding documents. It's literally in every institution. No problem, Carrie. Every institution, every system, every person has absorbed these racist ideas. And the thing about racism is that it's so normal that we can't see it. We can't feel it until something dramatic happens. Now, I won't spend too much time talking about this, but many of you may know that Breonna Taylor's murderers were acquitted today. 2 of them. The other person was convicted of wanton endangerment or something to that effect, but it wasn't the crime that was committed. And that's when we start to talk about how does racism impact our lives? 100%, because so many people don't have to think about the fact that this person did not get justice and was killed at the hands of the police. There was an entire group of jurors who decided that these people were not guilty of blatant crimes that have been well documented, and in the media and beyond for months. So while there is no correct answer, I would just ask you to think about what subconscious or unconscious things do you not have to think about when you think about race in your life. And so yes, also I have provided these slides to Carlos and Jason. So if this is something you'd want to do, I can make sure they get the link to this Jamboard as well, so you can use it too. We are going to do a quick, I'm gonna share computer sound. We're gonna watch a quick video from someone that I really admire her work. And as you listen, and you may be familiar with Jane Elliott, I want you to listen to how she talks specifically about the children, okay?
In a world where temptation lurks,
And I'm sorry for the ad.
a league of baby bell cheese helped us realize another snack was possible.
Okay.
Baby Bell, join the witness.
I said if I were black, they'd have killed me a long time ago. If I were black and saying the things I say, I wouldn't be alive. Bullshit. No, you're not gonna say I'm sorry there's racism. No, you will not have to ask me nicely. I consider this exercise an injection of the live virus of racism. I watched my students become what I told them they were. I watched little, wonderful, brown-eyed white people become vicious, ugly, nasty, discriminating, domineering people in the space of 15 minutes. I watched brilliant, little, blue-eyed, white Christian children become timid and frightened and angry and unable to learn in the space of 15 minutes.
So I want to stop us there and just for the sake of time, but what she said within the last 10 or 15 seconds is critical to our work in anti-racist education. And just from that, I hope you were able to glean, like, our children, they become who we tell them they are. And it's not necessarily a verbal telling. The world, through actions, through systems, through institutions, tell people who they are. And that's one of the reasons that whiteness and white supremacy is so hard for so many people to see, because the world affirms it. Everything around us affirms it. And it seems wrong when, as educators or as a Black woman or another person of color, when you bring up these when you bring up the topic, it feels wrong because the world has told us who we become. And through our actions, we tell our kids who they become. And if we are employing anti-racist pedagogy, anti-racist practices within our classrooms, we are ultimately telling our children, you can do, be, feel whatever it is you want to be, and that's okay. So we're gonna keep going. And I invite you to watch the rest of this video. It's pretty much her work truncated into about 3-4 minutes. So if you have time afterwards, just go ahead, take another look and finish the video. And it wouldn't be right as a teacher if we didn't have a learning target. So my goal for all of us today is you will develop a shared vocabulary and develop strategies for leading courageous conversations at your schools and within your chapters as well. And the essential action, and I like to define essential action as the essence, the foundational thing that you can do, that we must do as a result of what we engage in this evening. And that is, stop placing blame on the people and places beyond your control, confront your complicitness in racism, and employ all facets of anti-racism in your practice. And essentially what that says is, within your locus of control, do everything in your power to keep interrogating and keep journeying to be an anti-racist educator. And also accept that within the current systems that exist, we all, including myself, we all are complicit in racism. And after you make that assumption, you accept that, then you'll be able to move more into action. But first you have to accept it, that despite what I look like, sound like, feel like, want, as educators, we exist and we work within a racist institution. So first, it would be really important that we get to the me work before the we work. And a lot of times people are like, okay, LaTrice, what does that mean? It sounds, cool, it's catchy, but the essence of it is right here in this image. When you're on an airplane, they always tell you to put on your oxygen mask before you help the person next to you. The me work in anti-racist education is doing just that. You have to address your needs. your individual journey before you go back to your chapter, before you go back to your colleagues at your school, and you have to really dig in and look at the ugly sides of what it means to be or to hold your racial ethnic identity. And then think about it at some intersections as well. As a man or woman or non-binary person or transgender person, you have to look at all of the intersections of your identity and get really real with yourself about what it is you know, you don't know, and you need to know before you begin working on someone else. Of course, Jared, that's a learning edge for me. I know how I feel internally and how I believe that there is this, like you said, a false binary when it comes to gender. However, I have not always been able to articulate that. And that's an area that I'm still working on myself. And because if I can't name and include all people of color or all Black people when I'm talking about specific the specific existences of racism, then I am essentially perpetuating the problem. So here is an activity I really appreciate if you could engage in with me. I say 5 minutes, it won't take us 5 minutes to do this, but it's a root cause analysis. And how I present it and how I'm presenting it to you is with this question: why is this conversation difficult for me? And how you get to the fifth why or the root cause is you keep saying, okay, well, why? And I'll give you guys a quick example, one that we could probably all relate to in some kind of way, right? So here's your car. Your car stopped working. The first thing you say is, why? What's going on with my car? And then you can answer that, right? The car isn't working or won't start because because the battery is dead, okay? Well, why is the battery dying, or why does the battery keep dying? And then it might take some investigation. You might have to go to a mechanic or go to a parts store and get them to do a battery diagnostic. And then you may find out, well, the wires connecting the battery to the car are faulty, okay? Well, why are they faulty? And that may take another layer of investigation until you get down to the root cause. So if you guys could, and I'm not asking you to do this live with me, but just for yourself, explore, why is this conversation difficult for me? And I'm going to ask you to explore that on your own and go through the root cause analysis. I'm going to give 3 minutes instead of 5. So we'll come back together at 7:31. Okay, I'm gonna ask that we come back together, and I'm going to share with you just data from conducting these conversations for a while now. The root cause or the answer to that fifth why, that and sometimes it may be the sixth, seventh, eighth, or ninth, 10th why, when we start getting really, really deep into answering this question. And usually it boils down to, we as educators, we are not comfortable with our own racial ethnic identities. We move extremely carefully, or we are not even aware of our racial ethnic identity at all. There is a huge, huge range of ways that lead us to not being comfortable with our own racial ethnic identity. And until we are comfortable with that, I will never say these conversations will become easy or easier, but you will find them less difficult to engage in because you are aware of how you show up, how your racial ethnic identity marker shows up in the world. Okay, so this next portion, and also the last activity, again, I invite you to use that with the chapter members that you lead, with your colleagues in your schools. The next portion is calling a thing a thing. So so many of us can't get comfortable with our own racial ethnic identities because we struggle to say things like racism and anti-racism. We struggle to call things what they are in fear of upsetting someone else, causing someone else discomfort, or, you know, avoiding addressing our own discomfort. So that is another very crucial way that, a crucial step that we must, you know, get to when we're doing that me work. Like, be comfortable with saying the word Black when you're referring to Black people. One thing that I cannot stand, and it makes me feel so invisible, is when I'm in a room with, you know, Black people and white people, for example, and I'm constantly referred to as a person of color. No, I'm Black. And I'm aware of that. You're aware of it. And we are both uncomfortable because of your discomfort with calling a thing a thing. Some people who are Black prefer to be called or referred to as African American. That's a dialogue to have, but it's very, very critical that we call people by the identity markers that they choose for themselves, and by the identity markers that are representative of that group of people. So and that's another whole conversation, because you have to, if you're going to talk about calling a thing, then there's so many facets of it. We don't have quite the time to get into it this evening, but one of the things we can get into is this common vocabulary around the word racism. Now, I'm not going to ask you to unmute, but I just want you to say the word racism. And then after you say that, say anti-racism. And if it feels a little weird, that's okay. Embrace that discomfort and lean into it. And then as you see it show up in the world, call the thing a thing. Instead of, you know, referring to, perfect example, instead of referring to racial profiling by the police as stop and frisk, that might be a shorthand name for it, but call it what it is. It's racism, and it's racism built into the structure of policing in this country. And you're gonna make people uncomfortable around you. You're gonna feel uncomfortable, depending on the reaction you get from the individuals around you. But until we can call these things what they are, they're going to continue to exist in covert ways. Here we have some common vocabulary that I think is very critical as you begin this conversation to understand. We have anti-racism, individual racism, interpersonal racism, institutional racism, and structural racism. And usually where I get the most honest confusion is between individual and interpersonal, and then institutional and structural. And one thing that I call out when we're talking about individual and interpersonal, individual racism exists consciously and unconsciously, and you can project it and you can live in individual racism without ever having to direct it at an individual person. It becomes interpersonal when it comes up in between, like with you in your interaction with another person. And I'm going to do some examples on the next slide just so it can be even a bit more clear. And then institutional and structural. Institutional is more about the distribution of resources and power, and structural are how all of the ways racism exists to form a structure. And in this country, it's essentially the structure of our country, the backbone of our country, how racism pervades every single piece of it, no matter social, cultural, historical, interpersonal. It's pervasive within every structure that comes together and forms our what we would consider our society. So in context, the first one, anti-racism, choosing to teach the 1619 project instead of this idea of patriotic education, and not to become and not to be political, but this is a political context. This is a political conversation. It always has and will be. But anti-racism could show up in your classroom by teaching the truths of enslavement, of enslaved people, and of slavery in its in the way it shows up still today, the impacts that are still relevant in today's world. Instead of teaching this idea of patriotic education. And I'd argue that the current way education is situated in this country is this idea of patriotic education. Case in point, right now I teach 4th grade ELA and social studies. I'm spending the whole first quarter of school talking about the American Revolution, and one of the big ideas is patriotism. This patriotic education is deeply built into the curricula that we have. What is not is the representation of Black people from 1619 in this country. If you look at primary resources for the AP US History exam, the Boston Massacre painting, Crispus Attucks is not in that painting. He was there though. And that's what, and teaching that inclusive history is a way that anti-racism shows up in our work. And within individual racism, and these are examples that I tried to take the perspective as an educator in creating. So individual racism would be unconsciously assuming a student won't succeed because of the rigor associated with a computer science course. Instead of interrogating maybe that the root cause of why do you believe they're underperforming? Is it based on an academic record? Is it based on standardized testing, which I will argue are ways that racism shows up in public education? Or is it rooted in the lack of Black and Brown, Indigenous, Latinx faces within the computer science field? Interpersonal would be then taking that decision and then conversing about it with your colleagues, and subsequently disallowing certain students from entering your course for whatever other factors. And that does not only include, thank you, Carlos, that does not only include on the identity marker of race. It could be their perceived gender identity. It could be their social or economic status. Institutional racism, very easy to see that. That's how schools are funded in this country. And structural racism is how we participate in institutional racism without ever noticing it or questioning it. Like, most people do not notice or question, and even when they do notice, they don't question the how and the why of way schools are funded the way they are in this country. So now that we have some common language, and you are preparing to have this conversation, you have to set the stage and you have to establish rules of engagement. When you are preparing or setting the stage, I again can't say it any clearer. You have to interrogate your why you need or want to have this conversation. If you are the person that needs to lead, or are you the person that needs to learn? And not saying that everyone doesn't have the capacity to lead, but in some places, like for me, if you guys were doing a computer science session right now, I would be a learner, and I would be a proud and happy learner. So that's like the first step. Interrogate the why you need or want to have this conversation. Have a protocol ready. And I'm going to provide one to Carlos that he can share with you. It's called the Courageous Conversations Protocol. Some people may be familiar with it already. And perhaps some schools have protocols for difficult conversations. And then, more than anything, practice. Find that colleague, that fellow CSTA member. Find someone that's willing to be that person for you. And when I say that person, the person that will see your intent. Because the truth is that once you leave a safe space, and even within a safe space, you may cause harm without intending to. But once you enter this conversation with a larger group of people, your intent doesn't matter anymore. It's the impact that your words have. So you want to practice, and you want to research, and you want to ultimately know if you are the person that is necessary or best suited to lead the conversation. And if you're not, but you still want to have this conversation, it's upon you, it's up to you to find that person. And this was like funny to me when I made it. All the asterisks next to the different norms. So I have taken these norms and molded them, morphed them to meet the agreements and norms that I would like to see honored when I present these sessions. These norms are from Courageous Conversations. Again, I'll provide a protocol that they created for you to use. Or I'll even send a link to the book. The book is a book I refer to often. I referred to it this evening, getting ready to prepare for this evening. But I put these asterisk marks next to these, and I'm sorry, these norms are not from Courageous Conversations. These norms are norms that Teaching Tolerance molded from Courageous Conversations to meet the needs and the language necessary to reach children as well as adults. All of these resources, I have bookmarks on my computer, and I'm going to make them I'm going to send a hyperlinked email with everything in it to Carlos, so you guys don't have to go looking for them. But what I want to say here is like, assess your comfort level, asterisk. Because number 2, find comfort in discomfort. Don't disengage. These asterisks represent the importance that no matter what, do not disengage. Because the moment you disengage is a moment where you have lost learning. And when I say don't disengage, I don't want that to be misconstrued as, you know, become headstrong and double down on whatever belief has triggered or whatever you said that has triggered someone else. Instead, what I'm saying is, no matter what, don't disengage, because one of the truths that it's just a truth. Like there's nothing that I can do about, or Black people can do about anti-Blackness and what it has meant and what it has, the pain beyond discomfort, like the pain, the horrific conditions that Black people have lived in America for the last 400 years. We don't get to disengage. There's nowhere for us to disengage. There is no, you know, hole deep enough that we can dig. We still have to come up for air, and the air around us is contaminated with racist ideas. So with that being said, remember that, and remember you center a child. Even if that child is white, that child deserves to know and deserves to develop an anti-racist lens so that they're not perpetuating and continue to push these ideas of white supremacy and the inferiority of people of color. So before we wrap up, and I'm going to open it up for questions for the rest of the time we have together, I ask that we go back to our Jamboard. And there's a second page. And I know we hit on a lot of different things this evening, but I would just like for everyone to make a single commitment. No commitment is too small, too large. Make a commitment to your practice. It could be as your role as a CSTA leader, member, teacher, school leader, whatever context, make a commitment to your practice based on what we have discussed this evening. And I invite you to continue adding if you have more than one commitment, if you want to come back a little later after you process this. Again, this will be available to you indefinitely. So thank you for those who have shared. Thank you for those who are still processing. And now I'd like to open it up for questions. You can feel free to type them into the chat box. I'll monitor them there, or if you're comfortable, I'm also comfortable with you unmuting yourself and asking the question live.
Yeah, I'll start. How are you? I'm Marco Dinas from the Miami CSTA chapter.
Mark?
I think, I appreciate the workshop because I can give you an example. And, sometimes it's better to be uncomfortable, right? And just be honest. And I think in my community, I've done a lot for my community, Latinx, Hispanic, or whatever the terminology is. I've been to a lot of workshops and there's a lot of terminology.
Yep.
But I kind of noticed, what? I need to have that conversation with the Black students in my school. And, I can give you a personal example that made me, was that I'm originally from Los Angeles. And I think I'm fortunate to be from there. I'm sorry, can you hear me now? I'm fortunate to be from Los Angeles because I originally went to Los Angeles High School and it was like 80% Hispanic. And then I got transferred to Dorsey High School. And Dorsey High School was like 75% Black and the rest of us were Hispanic. But that made me as a person, because it just made me, understand the cultures. And, if anybody's not from LA is like diversified. And it just made me a better educator. So, thank you for the lessons today. Because, I still got a lot to learn. I think I'm educated, and I am, but it's a learning process. And, all the people here are chapter leaders. And, we have teachers that look up to us, or it's not necessarily look up to us, but more like get information from us. So it's our job to give this information out to the rest of the teachers. So thank you for letting me speak.
Oh, of course. And thank you for sharing. I too had a very segregated school experience, and that was from kindergarten through 12th grade. And the first time I shared academic space with a white student was my freshman year of college. And that was a eye-opener. And I think that I am so much better for it. And I'm grateful to have had parents who, introduced me to the world outside of our little our little four corners of Blackness here in Atlanta, Georgia. But I do think that there is so much value in exactly what you said, like knowing your role as a leader, that there are people looking to you. And if you model this learning, they'll see the value in it as well. Anyone else? I promise you, if you have a burning question, I always answer every question. Even if I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know.
I have a question if we've still got time for it.
Yeah.
So I identify as a non-binary individual. So I know what it's like to have people kind of take control of a narrative and kind of take it away from the individuals that are being oppressed in some way. And I say this as a white individual. And what I'm trying to voice here is, how do people like myself, white individuals, assist people who are being oppressed through racist, systemic racism and systemic practices and whatnot, without taking control of that narrative? In other words, like, how can we amplify voices without altering the original message, if that makes sense?
Yes, that completely makes sense. And thank you for your question. I think there's so many ways to do it, and I'll just share a few that I have found to be authentic practices. Despite how you may identify and you feel that you show up in the world tells you how you show up, right? So internally, even though I do identify as a woman, I show up that way in the world. And the world then in turn, responds to that in a variety of ways. Now, I have one of my closest friends is bisexual and non-binary, and she is a white woman, but we always talk about how we can coexist in our friendship, in our space, without having this oppression Olympics, because we know that we experience the world in different ways. The world responds to us in different ways. But at the end of the day, I can't take off my Blackness. I can't hide it. And not that you should. And not that she should hide that she's non-binary or bisexual. But when you look at her, you don't see that. So when you're engaging, and you want to amplify those voices, that's just something that is kind of like that gut check, right? It's like, I do experience a level of oppression, but how I present, and this is not true for all non-binary people. This is not true for, every single person. But think about how the world perceives you. It's kind of like that intent versus impact. Like you may intend to be very helpful, and you may intend to show that you have some level of understanding, but the impact could be this person is equating their gender identity, which is not something that can be seen in his particular case, just using you as an example. In his particular case versus everyone can see my skin color. So, and just listening to you and the thoughtfulness behind your question, I think that you have the right idea and you're on the right path. But also, I challenge you too to also authentically show up as who you are in spaces, because the goal is not just like liberation for one person, one group, one identity marker. It's liberation for all, in my opinion. So thank you for that question, and I hope it helps.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
So in the interest of time, I just wanted to jump in and first thank you, LaTrice, for being here and facilitating the conversation. I just took a couple of notes on things that I want to point out because, we're all in different places on this journey and this conversation today as we continue with, of course, these monthly meetups, but also the journey that we can do as individuals on our own time. And whatever that might mean. I know someone mentioned around dialogue with chapter members and finding a way to be comfortable. I see it as seeds that get planted and people are in different phases of sprouting. Some people still need more water and sunlight, and I won't continue with the analogy. I think you get it. But it's important that, as you mentioned, to also recognize your role sometimes as learner and being in environments where we put our learner hat, and you today putting your teacher hat, while also allowing us to share thoughts and reflect and get a pulse for where this group was. I felt that first activity that you did really helped kind of establish a pulse, a barometer. And I think it's a wonderful tool for, chapter leaders to bring back. I also want to point out that something that I found helpful is taking a historic lens. So there are going to be different entry points to have these types of conversations. I've seen and experienced success with history and facts, especially when I'm faced with resistance around the topic, whether it's, I don't agree with whatever they often find disagreements with. I tend to root and ground things in facts and history. And I recently did something like that in Miami, where we looked at the history of Miami, which is only like 120 years. And so that might be an entry point for chapter leaders to think about, is to look at your history of your city and see how you can interweave stories that might be an entry point that is fair for folks, that's grounded in facts. And finally, one of the things that came up too was in your exercise on why, which I did, and it got me really thinking about people and how they develop their worldview. I thought it's something that it was good to have to do at the beginning, because it challenges folks to think about, like, how is my worldview shaped, right? And to be open to receiving people and their worldviews. And there's not a right or wrong in listening and experiencing people's worldview. So overall, I just wanted to give that kind of feedback. And again, I know that this wasn't intended to be, we're all at different phases of the journey. I think that you established some great ways to begin and open up the dialogue, but there's going to be that discomfort, and things are going to come up. So the lines of communication are open for everyone too. Like, my email is listed here. Happy to share, and also invite LaTrice for future sessions like this, where we're working on a toolkit that we can give to chapter leaders. So thank you, Jason, for the opportunity as well. And LaTrice, really appreciate you and this facilitation tonight.
Of course. And before we wrap up, I have 2 invitations. The first is that you join me in doing this work. And there's so many ways for you to do that. And the first invitation is to just follow Equity Consulting on social media. You can visit our website. It's listed there. It'll also be in the slides. And my second invitation is, if you are in the place of you still need, to tend your garden, to water your seeds, I do offer a coaching program that essentially starts with the very basics of what is racial ethnic identity, and then guiding specifically for educators, and then guiding them through incorporating a deeper understanding of who they are and who the people are that they serve into their practice. So if you are interested in that, that's an invitation for you as well. So if you have any questions, I'm sure, I believe I'll make sure that my business email is provided to you guys. Somehow I was like emailing and texting Carlos so quickly one day that I responded from my personal email account, which is quite honestly a hot mess right now, because it's full of all these ads and sales, and I'm not going anywhere. So things get buried. So I'm going to share that information with you. And again, thank you. Thank you so much.
Also a plug for your resource that you have on your site. I just shared the link for the Anti-Racism for Educators 101. That 5-day email course was awesome.
Yes.
So thank you again, LaTrice. I'll turn it over to Jason.
Okay. Thanks,
Yeah,
guys.
I'd like to echo Carlos's thanks to LaTrice for joining us this evening, and I'd like to thank all of you for taking time out of your evening to water your seeds and grow your garden. If you don't mind, really quickly before we leave, I just dropped a link to a very short survey. It should only take maybe 30 seconds. It's 3 questions, just so we can kind of gauge how it went tonight and how to structure further sessions. And I also put the link in there for next month's sign up if you want to sign up now. I'll be sharing all of LaTrice's resources, the video from tonight's session, and her email address, the right one, this Friday when I send out the chapter leader correspondence. So you'll be able to get all these resources, slide decks, Jamboards, video, to take back to your chapter or to share with the other chapter leaders. So thank you again, everybody. In the interest of time, I'll go ahead and end it here, and we'll see you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.